is the last problem that we're going to do. I'm going to try to graph this object here. I'll try to sketch by hand, but in the end we'll use a 3D calculator to see what this looks like. So, like the plane region, I'm going to have to calculate some traces. Usually you calculate 3 traces, so let's let x be 0. So I'm calculating the yz trace. So I have 4y squared minus 8y plus z squared is 0. And here, if you notice, we can factor out the 4 and complete the square. And we see we can factor it out. So divide by 4. So if you're familiar with the conics, right, this would be a conic in the YZ plane specifically. This would be an ellipse in the YZ plane. So we could actually sketch that, but we have to take a couple more traces here. Let's take y equals 0. So we're looking at the xz trace. So 4x squared plus z squared is 0. You have 4x squared is equal to negative z squared. Okay, and so we just get a relationship here between 4x squared and negative z squared. Okay, so this is interesting because this doesn't look like it's going to be a conic. Okay, because we have this equal to 0 over here. If it was equal to 1, for example, on this side, then we would have an ellipse. So this is just going to turn out to be a pair of lines. So trace, let's take another trace, z is equal to 0. Okay, when z is 0, we have 4x squared plus 4y squared minus 8y is 0. And we do the same method of completing the square. So we're going to get that this is plus 4y minus 1 quantity squared is equal to 4. Divide everything by 4. Yeah, x squared plus 1 y minus 1 squared is 1. Okay, so if you notice this one, this is actually a circle. And it's going to be centered in the xy plane, right? I didn't mention that this is the xy trace at 0, 1. Right, so that's our x coordinate, that's our y coordinate, and the radius is 1, because this is 1 squared over here. So we have an ellipse in the YZ trace. In the YZ plane we have an ellipse. So if we slice it that way, then we have an ellipse. If we slice it horizontally, then what we get is circle. And if we slice it on the XZ plane, then we get a pair of lines. So how can we see that maybe on, tracing it, even though by hand, it's not, honestly, it's not the best thing to do to trace by hand an ellipsoid, but that's what this object will be. But we can certainly give it a go and then use our 3D calculator to kind of give us a better idea of what that looks like. So let's draw out our plane. And by the way, if we look at the original equation, we'll go back to that in just a second. We'll see that this figure is an ellipsoid centered at 0, 1, 0. Okay, so so the center of our ellipsoid is 0, 1, 0. So right here is the center, and we can work backwards. We have a circle of radius 1, centered at 0, 1, 0. On the XY trace. So what that looks like is just literally a circle. Let's call that 2 here. Radius 1, like that. So that looks like. So we did the XY trace. On the YZ trace, we have an ellipse. Now here we see that this value B is 2, so it goes up and down 2 units in the Z direction, and up and down, or left and right 1 unit, because this is 1 under here, and 4 is equal to 2 squared, right? So that's why it goes up and down 2 units, because it's 2 squared, and this goes left and right 1 unit, because that's 1, or 1 squared. So we need to go up 2 units from the center and down 2 units and left and right 1 unit. Obviously those overlap with these right here, so we don't really need to sketch anything more on there. Okay. Let me give this a title. Okay. And the final trace that we had was the XZ trace, which is not as telling really as the other trace, because we just have the relationship for x squared is equal to negative z squared. I mean, we kind of get the idea with this here, right? But for when y is 0, okay, we see that we have, we can let's say, x be 0, then z is 0, okay, that's 1 point. When x is 1, right, then it's 4, and actually we get a contradiction, so there's nothing coming out of this. So x is 0, okay, we already have that. X is 1, that leads to a contradiction. How about when if x is negative 1? That's also a contradiction. So basically what we're seeing is that this XZ trace is not really helpful for our diagram. So what our ellipsoid kind of looks like is this, but with this ellipse here just rotated 360 degrees. So let's just